Welcome, and thank you for joining us and giving up your evening for a topic which I'm sure everyone would rather not think about, which is septic tanks. So this is the agenda for this evening. My name is Hilary Clark and I am the Catchment Management Team Lead at Eden Rivers Trust. In a moment, I will pass over to Sarah Belton, who is a Director at Nutrient Neutral and a founder of Our Rivers. We'll be talking about the scheme as a whole, what the process looks like, and the homeowner journey. Then we'll hear from Paul Usher, Technical Manager at Hutchinson's Environmental, who will be talking about the technical details of packaged sewage treatment plants and what your new system could look like and why an older system may need upgrading. And finally, Laura Greenman, partner at HCR Law, is going to go through the legal details of the scheme, what you will need to sign and how that works. We'll be running a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and then type them into the box. If you can't see that button, you might need to find it in the More button with the 3 little dots, and it will be in there. You can submit your questions at any time. You don't need to wait until the end of the presentations. We have a colleague on standby ready to answer if they can while we go along, or we'll bring some questions together for a discussion at the end. So keep an eye out as there may be answers becoming available as we go along. And as I said, questions can be submitted anonymously. So I'm going to pass over to Sarah now, who's going to talk us through the scheme.
There we are. Thank you very much, Hilary. That's great. Yes, absolutely. The most glamorous evening you've spent in your lives talking about septic tank upgrades. So who are Our Rivers? We're a collaboration of specialists that have come together to support a new scheme within the Cumbrian region. The experts, as we say, are ourselves with the technical team that undertake a lot of the work. We around information management and the homeowner journey, with a main point of contact for the homeowners. As I said, there's our environmental champions, which are the Eden Rivers Trust and also South Cumbria and West Cumbria Rivers Trust, and Hutchinson's, who will give a bit more technical detail about upgrading, and our legal partners are HCR Law. So we are Our Rivers Cumbria. We also have other Our Rivers operating, Our Rivers Norfolk, for example, and it's a very similar setup there. So, septic tank, obviously what we're doing is septic tank upgrades. So we're offering the homeowners a free septic tank upgrade. There are no hidden costs, and what we pride ourselves in being is really transparent and clear and open throughout the whole process. What we do is exactly from the start explain what your obligations are to the scheme and what our obligations are to you. We are slightly different, I think, than many commercial people who undertake septic tank upgrades, in that we want to provide betterment in the sense of we'll go into what mitigation is, but we think we can go further than just upgrading septic tanks to generate nutrient mitigation. We want to reinvest in the local area. And that's what we've all come together, because we believe there's more that you can do than just a commercial entity. So we're reinvesting in the local rivers and the local community. That's excellent. Now my screen is not moving. There we are. We should press the button harder. Sorry, I've just gone through that thinking you were looking at it and you weren't. My apologies. So, nutrient neutrality, what is it? So, it is a government advice that was brought in a number of years ago, which designates certain areas as being nutrient neutral. This means there are high levels of either phosphorus and or nitrogen within the waterways, which are harmful to the environment, to fish, to all aquatic life. You quite often see eutrophication, which is excess algae within the watercourses and within lakes. Probably you're not unfamiliar with that in the area. We know there are certain issues. These areas are designated basically very, very sensitive to nutrients, are the highest value ecological protected sites we have within the UK. So these are our special areas of conservation, SACs, special protection areas, SPAs, which are most commonly around breeding birds, and also Ramsar sites, which are wetlands. Obviously, in this area, we have the River Eden, and others, I'll show you a map in a minute. They're designated for aquatic plant life, whiteclaw crayfish and salmon. So these areas are designated where they're failing these targets, and there are a number within the Cumbrian region. And not only is it, tragic environmentally, but the guidance is that you cannot allow any more new development within these regions unless you can demonstrate you're balancing out any new additional input from development, i.e. sewage, primarily sewage, with mitigating the existing inputs. So that's either from diffuse pollution, so agricultural, or point source, which can be existing sewage treatment discharges or septic tanks. So what we have to do in order to allow new development is actually balance out, so remove an existing source of nutrients within the environment. And to do that, one of the ways we can do that is to upgrade old septic tanks. So these are have limited treatment, as Paul will explain in a few slides' time. They're commonly bricks, old Victorian style septic tanks. They literally just, capture the solids and have minimal treatment otherwise. So these are quite polluting systems as such, particularly if they discharge directly to water. So both the old septic tanks, which are limited, and a packaged treatment plant, which is a more modern version, but also has very limited nutrient, not specific nutrient removal. And obviously the reason that you're here, hopefully, is that you have either a septic tank or a packaged treatment plant that you're interested in it being upgraded. So here's a map of all the areas in England that are currently designated. So as you can see, these areas like the Norfolk Broads, the Somerset Levels, the Solent down here, and more importantly, up in this region, we have the Tees Valley, the River Eden, Battonswaite and Derwent, and Esthwaite and the Kent SAC. I'll go a bit more, show a bit more close-up map in a minute. Okay, so the local authorities, so local councils within Cumbria, have all come together to try and generate solutions to nutrient neutrality, basically to generate mitigation to allow development to go forward. They formed a separate body called Nutrient Neutrality Northwest, and they're comprised of Cumberland Council, Westmorland and Furness, and obviously the Lake District National Park Authority. Now, a tiny bit of this area does sneak into Northumberland and a slither into Yorkshire Dales, but vast majority is within those three planning districts. There are several mitigation schemes being developed at the moment to generate phosphorus mitigation. This area is literally just phosphorus, not nitrogen as well, but all the measures that are put in place will obviously provide mitigation for both phosphorus and nitrogen. So the other schemes they're looking at in the area are wetlands and land reversion, for example. But the one we're talking about today is the septic tank upgrade scheme. So this is being facilitated by Westmorland and Furness Council. There was a tender out. Two contractors won the contract. Ourselves, obviously, Our Rivers Cumbria, and another company called Borough Environmental. So if you hear, obviously, you may hear of him in the area, operating in the area as well. So what this scheme is, upgrading these old systems to modern systems which have significantly higher nutrient removal, and therefore obviously reducing that current load that is discharged from your properties into either the watercourse or ground. So coming forward. So the other schemes will be coming forward over the next months and years, but this is the first scheme that's actually being implemented by Westmorland at this time. So this is the River Eden catchment. It obviously rises up here and flows southwards to Carlisle. The other significant tributaries, we have the Eamont and Lowther in this area, and then the Petrel and Coldew coming this way into Carlisle. So to be part of the scheme, your property has to be located in one of these catchments. As we say, that's the Battonswaite, Derwent, Esthwaite, and the River Kent, two small SACs here. So if you would like to, you can look up if your property obviously is within these areas. We have a map on Our Rivers actual website, so that's ourrivers.co.uk. But the Natural England site, which is a government body that oversees all of nutrient neutrality, they have a really good map that you can zoom in and out of, so you can get right down to almost garden level to see if your property is within those areas. And I think Sarah's going to put that link in the chat, if you would please, so that you can have a closer look if obviously you haven't been in contact with us already. So although these areas are all designated, there are priority areas where there's most development stuck at the moment, and these are obviously Carlisle, as you expect, major conurbations, Penrith, Appleby, and Kirkby-Stephen. So our main focus at the moment is within the Upper Eden area or the Eamont and Lowther. That doesn't mean we're not interested in the Lower Eden, but the priority areas are those, but we will get to the Lower Eden in time. So we'll talk about the timelines in a minute, but these are the kind of focus areas, and also upstream of Keswick here as well. Okay. So the process, what we will obviously commit to do as part of this scheme is provide a clear process. We're very customer focused, and we hope obviously those that have registered with us already, those that are interested, will have received a very clear information letter which describes all the different stages that we go through, and also drafts of the documents, so you can see up front exactly what you're signing up to. So yeah, exactly, there should be no surprises. So we absolutely don't want to pressurize anybody into signing up that they're not comfortable with. So we will always be available on the phone. You'll be assigned a dedicated person to take you through as well, so you know exactly who you're talking to. When we say for free as well, I just want to clarify that that is free reasonable cost. So that includes the upgrade, electrics, and decommissioning of the existing system. However, for example, we had one person we've already spoken to, they needed like a few hundred meters of pipe replacing between the house and the water course, which would have cost in the region of £11,000, additional to the what we call standard costs. If there are those costs, potentially we'll obviously discuss it with you up front, and you know, there's still the opportunity perhaps to share that, and we have a limit of that, but we'll talk to you individually. We've only had one so far that we've had to just discuss potentially additional costs to what which makes it financially viable. We'll also provide you with an estimate of any costs going forward. At the moment, obviously, septic tanks are fairly low cost because we don't actually do an awful lot. But obviously, electrical costs, emptying, servicing, and consumables. So we'll be upfront with those. Your commitments, once you have a new system installed, will be to maintain that system in line with environmental regulations, which are known as general binding rules, which involves an annual service, and you need to sign a legal agreement that you say that you will have that annual service undertaken. At your service, you'll have a certificate to say that you've undertaken it, and you need to submit that to the council annually, and obviously you need to commit to that for 80 years. And that really is that commitment. Paul will obviously talk a bit more detail about their commitment to the actual installation and what's involved with that and how that's managed. Oh yes, I did want to say as well, if you're on here on behalf of a family member that, like my mother, doesn't have a mobile phone, no internet or anything, we are more than happy to operate via post only and telephone, and yeah, be able to speak to people who are a bit hard of hearing. Had lots of practice with my mum, so more than happy. Obviously, appreciate that not everybody is online or able to undertake communications via computers. So initially, if you register for this scheme, we'll send you that information so you can be really clear on what's involved, and then we'll have to do an eligibility check on your property. So we'll check on the map whether you're definitely within the catchment and not. And you must, your property must obviously provide overnight accommodation. We can't include commercial buildings in that. The reasoning behind that is that when Natural England developed the scheme, it was worked out to be too complicated to understand where people work. So if you had a building you went to work in, sewage is obviously discharged from that, but it was impossible to work out where people were in the catchment. So it was assumed if you lived in that catchment, you'd work in that catchment, and therefore we could disregard any commercial buildings and assume that all sewage is discharged from their residents. Otherwise, it'd be double counting and really complicated. So we can only ever use any property that has overnight accommodation within this scheme. If it's a holiday cottage, so an Airbnb, there are assumptions around the occupancy rate of those and the amount of occupancy, so number of people within it and number of people, percentage of time it's occupied over that year. If it's a holiday home, but it's only used for a handful of weeks a year, that won't be eligible because it doesn't generate enough mitigation for it to be financially viable. We don't gain enough from it to cover the cost of the installation. We'll also check other things like your proximity to a borehole or a watercourse. Some of these will affect whether you need a permit or not. And anything that does require a permit will take a bit longer. I believe Paul's going to speak a bit more about that. So this is the eligibility checks if you discharge to surface water. Some of you will know, some of you don't know. Some of it is a bit complicated, exactly where your existing system discharges. If you know you have a drainage field and you discharge to ground, there's another set of criteria that have to be fulfilled. This again was designed by Natural England to consider if that discharge to ground actually has a significant impact on the watercourse, so in this case the River Eden or Kent. So it will collect some additional information again to help out with probably the next phase, which is surveys. So the exact location of the tank, any access, potentially issues, if the tank is functioning well, a number of bedrooms you have, etc. So once that eligibility check is undertaken, we'll send you a homeowner agreement. I'll go on to the next slide now, which describes the whole homeowner journey. We will send you a homeowner agreement, which outlines, again, that you accept that we will undertake the septic tank upgrade for you. It confirms that you're happy with the GDPR. So we will share your information with both Paul, so he can come and take a survey, and Laura, who can start undertaking the legal checks. So then we have to validate the ownership. That is with HCR law. And then simultaneously, if that the land registry check just to prove that you own it, that is it, and that your land is registered, because the legal agreements have to bind the land. Hutchinson's will then come out and undertake a survey of the property just to clarify exactly what is there and undertake the detailed design of what will go in, and therefore we can cost it as well. So if you pass that stage, that it is legible, and so you know the priority area, we'll then ask you to assign the legal agreements. So one legal agreement is with the council, the unilateral undertaking. Laura's going to go through this in much more detail. And the second is the actual installation. So there's two separate agreements there that you need to look at. Once those are all agreed, the work is then undertaken. It is all signed off with the building regulations to make sure it is commissioned correctly and you have a completion certificate. And then we obviously commence the actual period of servicing, which within this scheme you get 3 years free servicing with Hutchinson's as well. I think that is a bit of the main kind of whistle-stop tour. The only other thing I would say at the moment, in addition to being in a priority area, if you have a discharge to ground, we need to undertake additional assessments. That may take a little longer. And if there's more complicated elements around permitted development and planning, that will take a little longer. And what we will do, we'll give you an idea of how long we think it will take. So obviously those are really simple, have no additional things that will hold it up. For example, a mortgage. Laura will talk about that a bit more in a minute. That should be fairly swift to go forward to the next stage and actually installation. This contract is for initially a year, but then they expect it to roll over for another 3 years. So they expect the whole scheme to last 3 years, provided the government doesn't change its mind. There's still a need for this credit mitigation. So those that do need planning permission or take longer, we still expect to be able to upgrade your system, but it will be just a little longer down the road. So I think on that note, yeah, Paul, talk a bit more about exactly what the maintenance is included in the maintenance and those details. So that's me, I think. Thank you very much. And I will now pass over to Paul, who will talk more detail about installations. Paul.
So there we have the presentation there to start with. Off-main sewage treatment, yes, dark and murky corner of the construction industry indeed, as any of you who have had any experience with talking to contractors will realise. It's not rocket science, but there is some science, and there's a lot of observation of good practice. Let me find myself on here. So in the next 15 minutes, we're going to discuss those topics. What is the pollution? Why does it need to be treated? Common off-main systems, how do they work? And obviously Q&A at the end of all presentations or through the chat, please. If anything's not clear, just ask in the chat. We'll go from there. Got to be clear that we're not talking about this sort of pollution. I don't know how things got quite that bad in those photos, but it's very obvious is that sort of pollution. You'd recognise it and hopefully you'd do something about it, ideally before it got this bad. What we are talking about, we've missed a slide there. I don't know where it's gone, but it's gone. So we'll just go straight into what's in domestic sewage that does pollute. So we've got pathogens, so viruses, bacteria, parasites, they all cause infections and can kill ultimately. So that's one reason for treating sewage. We don't really measure those parameters in what we do, but what we do measure is organic matter and how that is broken down, basically carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, that's in organic matter. And that usually relies on aerobic decomposition. And for that, oxygen is required from the environment in which that decomposition occurs. And if that's in an aquatic environment, it strips the oxygen out of it, which means that there's less oxygen for other organisms. Anaerobic decomposition, such as occurs in septic tanks, doesn't require oxygen, but it does produce chemical compounds that themselves damage the environment, as well as smelling quite bad. Sorry, we've gone the wrong way there. Then we've got nutrients, nitrates and phosphates, which are fertilizers present in sewage. And when they're released into the environment, they fertilize plants that grow in water. And those plants require oxygen, and as they grow, they block sunlight, they create cover and shade in the water for predator species. And when they die, they themselves decompose and strip further oxygen out of that environment. So overall, we need to protect the environment for public health and amenity. And as Sarah's said, you know, it's nutrient neutrality within the Eden catchment to allow development. But I would say it's not improvement. It's just maintaining the status quo. It's not letting things get worse. So in terms of phosphate, which is what we're concerned with in this catchment, that's where phosphate comes from in domestic sewage. So, you know, we ourselves there are accounting for about, what, 64% of phosphate. Food waste is a little bit. Main supply, yeah, it goes into water. Toothpaste 1%, but you can see that there's dishwasher and laundry detergent. And one of the things that you can do to stop phosphates or reduce their impact is not to put food waste down the sink, and also to change your dishwasher and laundry detergent to phosphate-free ones. And I think there'll be in the chat some brands that are phosphate-free, so you can have a look at those. Sorry, something's gone oddly wrong with this presentation because we've gone straight to a drainage field there. What we're doing is a septic tank there. So you can see that it's a septic tank in elevation. So you can see that we've got there, that's the inlet, that's the outlet, and literally the sewage comes in, some of it settles, some of it floats, and it comes through to the other end and out it goes. That's what it looks like in real life. So we have here the inlet chamber, then we have the primary settlement chamber in there, secondary settlement chamber there, and then the outlet inspection chamber over there, and off it goes down the hill. We're going to go back to the septic tank just to see how it works and what it's supposed to do and why sometimes they don't work. So the purpose of a septic tank is twofold. It's to separate solids from liquids and then to retain those solids for periodic removal for further treatment and disposal elsewhere. You really must get your septic tank emptied by a registered waste carrier who will almost always take it to a municipal treatment works and get a waste transfer note for it. Some farmers are allowed to process the waste themselves, but they do so under license, and they will also be able to provide you with a waste transfer note because they're licensed to do it. So we can see at the start here, the dip pipe. So the sewage comes in and then goes down here, and the solids settle to the bottom. Things that are more dense than the surrounding water settle to the bottom. Things that are lighter are supposed to float to the top, and they form a scum layer. You're wondering what might be lighter? That'll be fats, oils, grease, and soap generally. Once it's settled in there, it goes through here through displacement. So 200 litres in here equals 200 litres out here. But we're looking for quiescent conditions in which these solids can settle. And that settlement process carries on in this secondary chamber. Then we have a protected outlet here, and the clarified liquid goes up through there and out through there. And you can see that this T-pipe here blocks the scum from going out into the drainage field. As I say, it all works on displacement. So, you know, you run a bath and you let a bath go 200 litres in, 200 litres out. There's no control of the flow. So a septic tank will remove about 20 to 40% of the organic pollutants in sewage by separation through gravity. Some particulate phosphorus is removed, but that's not the polluting part of phosphorus, and it removes no nitrogen to speak of. There's very little biological treatment in a septic tank, and it's anaerobic, slow, and smelly. Modern septic tanks look more like that. So there's a graph tank there, and there's two Clargester tanks there. So we've got a vertical baffle there, like the traditional brick-built septic tank, but in here we've got a horizontal baffle, and they operate on the same process. And some of them nowadays have no baffle in them at all. But it's less easy to see in those what's actually happening. So you can see there, that's a Clargester tank. I think it actually says it on the lid. But when you look into one of those, all you see is that. And that's the neck, and then there's the big spherical base at the bottom where the sewage is separated. You can't see any scum sitting on the top of there, and that's typical of a tank that is receiving rainwater, because what happens there is we know the rate at which water will come into a septic tank over a 24-hour period from a house of a certain size. People are thought to produce about 150 litres of wastewater per person per day, all of which goes into the septic tank, and it's sized to have what's called a hydraulic retention time, so for long enough to allow the solids to settle out. When you get rainfall, 1 millimetre of rain on 1 square metre equals 1 litre of rain. On a 100 square metre roof and a torrential downpour, you can imagine how much water will actually go through that tank and wash out the solids. Conversely, this tank hasn't got any rainwater going into it. You can see that there's a good solid scum on there, but it is leaking, and that's the second chamber, and that's, I actually managed to be able to stand on that, and it didn't move, so that's solid soil. So that hasn't been emptied for, I would say, decades, to be honest with you. There's another tank that's almost overflowing. On this side here, you can see that there's only about 2 inches between the top of the scum and the underneath of the soffit of the tank. And probably that sludge might be 8 inches, 10 inches thick. And it's certainly gone up inside this outlet T-pipe, and it will just be flowing out down the outlet drain. So lack of desludging and rainwater going into the system are 2 really bad faults. People talk about septic tanks and very rarely talk about drainage fields. Drainage field, as I say, if the tank is removing 20 to 40% of the pollutants, the organic pollutants, that leaves the drainage field to remove 60 to 80% of those pollutants and all of the nutrient pollution as well. Herringbone drainage fields are commonly referred to, and you can see a central spine there with fingers going off. Problem with that is if it's laid badly, these finger ends get surcharged. So it changed to this design where all of those finger ends are now joined together. That was in about 2002, I think, that came into building regulations. So if you've had a new drainage field since 2002 and it doesn't look like that, you have a problem. So what's the purpose and the function of the drainage field, which is much misunderstood? So as it removes that percentage of organic pollutants, it's got to remove the remaining organic matter and all the nutrients. And it does that by distributing the septic tank effluent over a large enough area to percolate through aerobic soil. That's very important. That's air-rich soil, aerobic soil, at a rate slow enough for the chemical, biological and physical filtration processes to complete that process. So it's over that area, and that depends on the number of people that live in the house, the number of bedrooms in the house, the size of the septic tank, how often it's emptied to take out some of those organic pollutants, but it also depends on the porosity of the soil. A well-functioning septic tank will remove, as you can see here, these are the parameters. So BOD is effectively organic matter. Suspended solids is organic matter as well. We'll ignore coliforms because we don't measure those, and viruses, but they are important to take out. And then we've got nitrogen, and then down here we've got phosphorus. So you can see those are the figures in the raw waste as it goes in. That's what a septic tank does to reduce it. So you can see in terms of phosphorus, very, very little, goes in at 10 to 40 milligrams per litre, comes out at 10 to 30 milligrams per litre, and that's a little bit of settlement of particulate phosphorus. But then if you have 3 feet or about a metre of aerobic soil beneath your drains, then you can see it goes to 0 and to background levels here for forms of nitrogen and for phosphorus. So a well-built septic tank and drainage field is a very effective means of treatment. The problem is they don't get well designed, they don't get well researched, and they don't get well built. So how would you do that? You do percolation tests, which if you've got a soak away and you're on the scheme, we'll be doing percolation tests in your garden. What we do is we fill this with water, see how fast it drains away, work out the porosity of the soil, and that in combination with the size of your house will tell us the metre squared area that we need for your drainage field. We'll also do a trial hole, which most installers don't do. What we've got there is we're looking for limiting factors to the existence of that 3 foot of clear aerobic soil beneath the drainage field pipes. So here we've found groundwater, and generally we need to go from surface to about 1.7, 1.8 meters deep without finding rock and without finding groundwater, so that it will work in all seasons. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is that we've got a house with a septic tank and a drain field, needs to percolate through the soil, and it gets purified as it goes down, and then it returns into the groundwater. Some people have soak-away chambers, soak-away pits, or the pipe just stops. That's what happens there. Basically, you get a buildup of liquid, and then you get this plume of saturated ground with no treatment in there, because it's not aerobic. It's saturated with water, so there's practically no oxygen in there at all. It all gets used up by bacteria, and then those bacteria die. And then we end up with groundwater pollution. Whereas with a drainage field, we've got long series of pipe, so the septic tank effluent is spread over a wide area to prevent saturation. Aerobic soil bacteria, microorganisms remove the pollutants and pathogens. And effectively what they do is they convert these complex chemical compounds in sewage into simpler compounds, ideally water, carbon dioxide, and then even elements if it denitrifies. So you get down to nitrogen, which is like 70% of the atmosphere anyway, and you end up with unpolluted groundwater. You can imagine if that just goes straight into a watercourse, you end up with the same problems of oxygen being stripped out. That's what happens when you have saturated drainage fields or a soak-away pit. It just fills up, it comes up to the surface, and you end up with this black, stinking, foul liquid on the surface. So that's the importance of a good drainage field. Drainage field design is obviously subject to site and also to the competence of the contractor that puts it in. And people started in the 1970s to develop packaged sewage treatment plants. So you get settlement in here, aeration in here, and that effectively combines the function of a septic tank and a drainage field in a single factory designed, factory built, independently tested unit whose construction can be repeated endlessly. So you get a factory built piece of kit that takes the skill and the risk out of building a drainage field. And they're the sort of results that you get from a packaged sewage treatment plant. So in terms of BOD removal, you remember I said before that 20 to 40% of the organic pollutants, the BOD, gets removed. Packaged sewage treatment plant, or this particular one, which is a Graph 1 to clean, takes out 98%, brings it down to 7 milligrams per litre. Standard and British standard is a maximum of 20 milligrams per litre. Takes out the suspended solids, 14. British standard is 30. And then ammoniacal nitrogen here is down to 0.5. British standard maximum is 20 milligrams per litre. We also get really good phosphate reduction as well. They don't turn wastewater into Evian. That's a nice render from a sewage treatment plant. Everything's brown and it's filthy in here, and it's lovely. It's clean water in the end. What we tend to find is this. So it's really, really important that people maintain the packaged sewage treatment plant. And of course, that's part of the commitment going forwards. So within the scheme, this is what we offer. So very briefly, you'll get years 1, 2, and 3 included with the upgrade. And we check the tank, the mechanical and electrical components, and that's what facilitates the biological treatment. And we do field tests for BOD, suspended solids, ammonia, and for phosphates. Year 1 also includes an inspection at 3 and 6 months at no cost. So we come to site and check those parameters to make sure the tank is working and you've not switched it off. If there are problems with it, we'll discuss those with you. We'll talk to you about detergents, laundry days, that type of thing. We also will do laboratory tests, so it's not just our field tests, we'll actually send them away to a lab. The council's very interested in that. And we'll also do random ad hoc field testing. At the end of year 3, you'll need to start paying for the service through year 4, and that's payable at the end of year 4 and at the end of year 5. We did try and work out a way of binding people to that, and it's just too difficult. So we're just going to work on the basis that, you know, we're going to provide good service in the first 3 years, and then if you take out the service contract with us at the end of the the beginning of the 4th year, you pay at the end of the 4th year. We don't charge in advance. You know, we hope you're happy with our service. One point to note is that we don't include desludging or emptying, but we will advise you of the requirement to empty at service intervals. So our preferred plant is the Graf Clean. It's been working with Graf now for about 8 years, since they really started up in the UK. We've installed literally hundreds of their plants. We know how they work. We know some of the foibles with them. They produce good quality effluent throughout. Graf themselves test for phosphate on lots of sites, and I've got information on that. Value for money, as far as we're concerned. Low running costs, as far as you're concerned. And they are really the quietest of what we call air-driven packaged sewage treatment plants. In terms of running costs, most of what we're seeing are 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses. They all share the same air blower, and it's about £50. Well, it's exactly £50.26 a year, including VAT, to run at 26p per kilowatt hour. And that's a very current price, October 25 price cap. Warranty, installation, 1 year. You might think that's not very much. It's standard in the construction industry. We don't go in with insurance-backed guarantees, because usually they just cost more than they're worth. The packaged sewage treatment plant vessel itself is warranted for 15 years, but when you see it, you know it's going to last for far longer than that. It's made out of 8 to 10 millimeter thick, high-density polyethylene. It's thickly ribbed. It's not going to decompose in the ground. Its internal components are mostly plastic, some galvanized steel, some stainless steel, but we've not had any problems with those in the time that we've been working with Graf. And then the electrical components, the air blower and control panel, actually carry 3 years warranty. How long will it take to install? Usually no more than a week, unless it's a really complicated site or you've got a very big drainage field. We will rake the as-dug topsoil back over the plant. Might import some if required, and we'll grass seed it. We don't turf because it depends on the time of the year. What happens to as-dug spoil? We'll either take it away from the site or spread it on site by prior agreement. It depends if, you know, you might have some holes to fill, something like that. Old septic tank is emptied. Again, no cost for that. It's backfilled and covered over with as-dug topsoil. Hopefully that tells you enough about the processes and the installations. Not everybody will go for it. That's fine. People have different circumstances, different views. But if you've got any technical questions that I've not addressed, then just drop them in the chat. So now it's over to Laura Greenland of HCR Law to talk you through the legal aspects of the scheme. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Paul. That was great, and thank you very much for the introduction there. As Paul mentioned, my name's Laura Greenman. I'm a solicitor and partner at HCR Law, and we're delighted to be working with Our Rivers on this project. So hopefully you can see my slides. Hilary, do you mind just giving me the nod to let me know that that's all working okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Laura. Thank you.
Marvellous, thank you. So I am going to give you a bit of a talk through the legal agreements that form part of this process. Obviously, we've alluded to those at a bit of a high level already, but I just wanted to provide a little bit more detail on what will be entailed. So just a brief recap initially in terms of the overall procedure then. So there is a 2-stage process underway here. So first of all, eligibility is assessed. And as mentioned, during this phase, Our Rivers will assess your eligibility for an upgrade. So at this point, you aren't committed at all. You're not obliged to go ahead, and equally, you're not entitled to an upgrade at this stage either. So at this point, you're simply asked to share some information and to permit access to your property. So as we've mentioned, this is the stage at which Paul and Hutchinson's would be coming out to carry out their initial survey. And I and my team here at HCR will be doing some initial title checks. So that would be via information that's already in the public domain and information that we can obtain from you directly. If all goes well through that initial eligibility check, then we proceed on to phase 2, and that is the upgrade itself. So that's, of course, if you want to go ahead. And again, at this stage, you aren't obliged to go ahead if you don't want to, even if you are eligible. If you do want to go ahead at this stage, then there will be a couple more legal agreements to enter into, which we'll talk you through in a second. And then the upgrade will be arranged at a time to suit you. So just looking at those two phases in a little bit more detail then. Phase 1 eligibility, the process starts with you registering your interest, and that can be done online or via contact with Our Rivers by post, email, phone, whatever is the most appropriate mechanism for you. And at the end, we'll have a link to the website and a QR code in case you do want to have a little bit of a look into that in any more detail. Once registering your interest, you will be asked to sign up to the homeowner agreement. At this stage, that is just allowing the initial checks, as we mentioned, to be carried out. So your eligibility check and then confirmation at this stage as to whether you're able to proceed or not. So if you are able to go ahead, we will seek your agreement to proceed to phase 2, and that will ask you to sign up to the more detailed terms and conditions in the installation agreement. So that is, as you'd expect, a slightly more detailed agreement at that stage, because there will be more I's to dot and T's to cross, and I'll come on to those in a bit more detail in a second. So as and when you're signed up, the upgrade will be arranged with you. And at this stage, we will prepare and sign up the unilateral undertaking, which again, as we've mentioned, we'll come on to in a second. The upgrade will then be carried out. Once that's been carried out and building regulations has been approved, as Paul has mentioned, the maintenance phase will begin. So looking at those agreements in a little bit more detail then, the first one is the homeowner agreement. And this is entered into between homeowners and Our Rivers. No other parties are involved at this stage. And this permits Our Rivers to carry out the eligibility checks. So in particular, you will need to allow access to your property at this stage for the inspection to be carried out, but that will be at a time to suit you. And if there are any particular requirements relating to that access, then of course, Paul and his team can take those into account for you. Our Rivers will then contact us and ask us to carry out a title review. So that will be us looking at the interest in your property, essentially to make sure that the parties that we are liaising with are the owners of the property, to identify whether there are any other interests, and so that we can spot if there are any other potential issues that may factor into either the eligibility or the upgrade process itself. So that's all our kind of future proofing, looking to make sure that everything's in order so that we can go ahead, and that if there are likely to be any issues, that we've identified them nice and early on in the process. So as mentioned, at this stage, there is no cost to you as homeowners. You're not obliged to proceed. And yeah, as we said, it's not an obligatory process at this point. You can decide not to go ahead if you want to, even if you are eligible. So the next stage then is the installation agreement. So this is entered into between homeowners and Our Rivers in the event that a property is eligible to proceed. So this is the agreement that permits Our Rivers with its partners to carry out the septic tank upgrade within a period of 2 years. The details of the upgrade will all be agreed with you, and Paul has already gone through the detail of what that may look like and any additional requirements that may pertain to that. This agreement will record that the nutrient mitigation will belong to Our Rivers as part of the process, and ultimately that will accrue to Nutrient Neutrality Northwest as a part of the scheme, as we've mentioned. The trade-off there being that in return for the free of charge upgrade, the mitigation will accrue to Nutrient Neutrality Northwest. The only point that I make there in terms of the upgrade being free of charge is that there may well be, if you decide to sign up to the installation agreement, but then decide you don't want to proceed, there is a possibility then that there could be a minor charge if you decide to terminate the agreement in respect of any of the abortive costs that have been incurred to date. So things like the site visit or any investigations that we've carried out, but at this stage the cost would be minimal. And then I've mentioned there that the upgrade itself includes an annual service, but forgive me, I've mentioned for the first 2 years when it's actually the first 3 following installation. So apologies for that typo there. And then the final point to note on the installation agreement is that there will be a further obligation there to ensure that you enter into a unilateral undertaking. And that's the document that we're going to come on to next. Sorry. So the unilateral undertaking is a slightly different agreement. The first 2 that we've mentioned are between our rivers and homeowners, so entirely private agreements. The unilateral undertaking is a little bit different, and this is because this is the agreement that ensures that the mitigation is coming forward in a way that allows it to generate nutrient neutrality for the benefit of Nutrient Neutrality Northwest. So that being the case, it's entered into between the homeowner, any other parties with an interest in the land, so we've mentioned mortgage companies, but also potentially long leasehold owners, and the local planning authority. So we've touched upon which authorities they will be. The unilateral undertaking is entered into by way of a legal deed, and that means that it binds the land and it will need to be signed as such, but I can talk you through those particular formalities. Essentially, it means that you need to sign in the presence of a witness, that's it essentially. That can be done virtually or by way of hard copy, so it's relatively straightforward, but a particular signing requirement there. There are particular obligations that are embodied in this unilateral undertaking. The first is that it will require the septic tank upgrade to be undertaken and maintained for a period of 80 years, pursuant to a service contract. That may sound like a particularly long period of time, and I understand that entirely. This is reflective of the requirements of Natural England and the nutrient neutrality regime as a whole. So the purpose here is to ensure that nutrient neutrality is preserved in perpetuity. So this is a standard requirement in relation to any neutrality scheme across the country. It's not a particular catchment specific requirement. And it's to reflect the fact that, as I say, that nutrient neutrality needs to be scientifically secured. So not an odd obligation in the context of this scheme as a whole, but one that will be documented in there and will be made clear. But for the reasons that I'll come on to in a second, it may not be as onerous as it could initially appear. So during that period, the records need to be maintained and kept, as Sarah has already alluded to. The package treatment plant will also then need to be repaired, looked after and replaced at the end of its operational life. So this again is consistent with the wider regulatory regime. We've heard from Paul in relation to the general binding rules and other regulatory requirements. So of course, being a homeowner of a property with a solution such as this, you would of course need to be maintaining it in the usual way and replacing it as and when it's no longer operational. So hopefully nothing kind of unusual or unduly onerous there. And in fact, more reflective of what you'd be expecting to do in terms of maintenance as a homeowner with a property served by such a system. So while we've mentioned that the unilateral undertaking binds the land, in some respects that can be a useful tool, I would say. And that's because you don't then have to worry about a situation whereby if you sell your property or the worst should happen and your property is inherited by family members or children or whoever it may be, this undertaking will bind the land automatically. That happens by operation of the law. It will sit there, it will bind the property as opposed to the homeowners as individuals. And so you won't have to go through the process of dealing with further agreements as and when the property changes hands. In some respects, I think that makes the situation much more straightforward, and it means that it's very apparent to everybody, should the property be sold in the future, that this arrangement is in place and that these are the obligations that would continue to apply. So, is any of this a concern? No, I think in short is the answer. The reason for that is because the unilateral undertaking is a requirement to ensure the mitigation is properly secured. The terms of the unilateral undertaking have been agreed with the relevant local planning authorities, so everybody is judged against the same criteria and these are being applied in respect of each upgrade. the obligations are split with our rivers. So the obligations are reflective of which parties will be carrying out which stages of the process, so that our rivers will be arranging the upgrade and that homeowners will be dealing with the maintenance. As I say, the obligations that sit with the homeowners largely mirror the requirements that they will be required to adhere to anyway as part of the wider regulatory regime. So it's not looking to make sure that there's any additional regulation or requirement here, but instead that those usual standards that apply across the board are being maintained. And finally, we'll make sure that you receive a copy of the draft unilateral undertaking, as I say, that's in a standard form, but with a plain English summary so that it's very clear what the terms are. And if you have any concerns about that, you can of course raise them and we can discuss them with you. So a couple of common questions then. The first one, what if you have a mortgage over your property? Of course, not an unusual circumstance to be in and not an issue. So as I've mentioned, your mortgage company would need to be notified of the proposed upgrade and asked to join up as a party to the unilateral undertaking. Unfortunately, unless you're redeeming your mortgage, we won't be able to avoid that requirement. So we would recommend that you speak to them as early as possible so that they can be aware of the fact that this agreement is going to have to be entered into, and you can then find out who will need to sign, because as I say, the mortgage company will need to physically sign up to the document. That's the unilateral undertaking only. So it'll be handy to know who you need to speak to get that arranged without any delay. What if you want to move house through the process? Actually, this situation has arisen already. It's not necessarily an issue. I think it's a key one for communication with your potential purchaser. As I've mentioned, the obligations in the unilateral undertaking will bind the land. So if the property is sold, once the unilateral undertaking has been entered into, those obligations will already continue to apply for a purchaser. If, however, you're talking about proceeding with an upgrade at a point whereby you're about to move house, I think it would be sensible for us to have a conversation just to make sure everybody is on the same page and we can ensure your purchaser is comfortable and they're having any discussions that they should have with their mortgage lender, just to make sure all is in order. The last thing we'd want is to cause any delay for anybody. What if your septic tank serves multiple properties? Again, not necessarily an issue. One that we would pick up as part of our eligibility checks and have a discussion with you about. The key here is making sure that all of the parties involved and served by the system are on board and happy and signed up as part of the scheme, so that we can make sure everybody is pulling in the same direction and in agreement. And then finally, what if your septic tank or drainage field is on land outside of your property or on land that you don't own? Again, a surprisingly common situation actually, and again, one that will come up as part of our eligibility check for you. So as part of checking the title and as our initial title review, we will identify what land you own and what is going to sit where as part of our discussion with Paul and Sarah. And in doing so, we will pick up and advise you as to whether there are any additional requirements or consent. So in particular, things like planning permission or property rights easements. So we would have a discussion with you about those. And as indicated, there are a certain amount of those processes that we can deal with as part of the Our River scheme, and anything else would be notified to you and of course discussed in order that we can come to a mutually agreeable solution. So that is everything that I wanted to touch upon on the legal agreements, and I'm sure we will have some more questions now in the Q&A session, for which I will pass back to Hilary.
Thanks, Laura. I hope that everyone's still with us and following all that through. There was a lot of detail in all of those presentations. I think, yeah, so the panelists have all got their cameras back on and will be ready to answer your questions. There's some that have come in the chat already in the Q&A, but if anyone's got any other ones that they want to ask, just add them in and we'll try and get to them. So I guess maybe if we just start at the top. So the first question that we've got there is, what is the timescale for the surveyors to come out and check properties for suitability for the upgrade? And the comment is added that they've been waiting for some time already. I don't know, Paul or Sarah, whether you're best to respond to that one.
I did actually have a look at just on the system, and the information was sent to Paul, I think, a week ago to arrange a site visit. So I will say it is imminent for Paul to be in touch. I'm going to put him on the spot looking at his schedule. But as you can imagine, we had quite a lot of interest to start with. So we did a lot of eligibility checks. And I think, as I discussed earlier, well, haven't discussed in detail, have we? But there have been some complications with really understanding exactly what is required with planning. And the position has moved recently about drainage fields in particular. So if it was to ground, it was understood that it needed permission or permitted development, and now all 3 councils have agreed that is not the case. So there was a bit of a hump there, but we're going to move forward quite quickly, I think, on those now. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've had a lot of interest, and what I have to do is I'm from the Lake District, but I don't live there any longer. I live near Leeds. So what I have to do is I have to sort of like make up a milk round of different sites to visit, and then I've got to contact people to see if they're there, so on and so forth, to sort of like try and plan a route through the Lake District, you know, visiting properties without too much driving, because I've got to make the most of my time, because obviously we existed as a business before this came along. We've got the capacity to deal with it, but we just need to sort of like break ourselves in. So those people who have signed up and are waiting, I will get to you, don't worry. I think the scheme, this part of the scheme, or this first year of the scheme, finishes in the end of March. Is that correct, Sarah? But there's years 2 and 3 to come through. So if you're worried about losing your place in the queue or there not being enough funding available to do it, I would say don't worry on that regard. We've prioritised certain discharges so far to watercourses, because they're obviously more polluting, because the septic tank effluent that I've explained to you is really very unpleasant, is going straight into the watercourse, not like this crystal clear stream at the top of Ennerdale behind me. So yeah, where things go into a drainage field, if you have a drainage field, they've got knocked back down the queue just a little bit, because you know, there's a bit more work involved in those to pull them over the line.
Great, thanks, Paul. Thank you. So next question. Asking about the graph 1 to clean, does it provide a shallow dig tank option? Paul, that definitely sounds like a question for you.
Yeah, they don't provide a shallow dig tank. I think the standard invert on a 3 to 4 bedroom house, no, 4 to 5 bedroom house, is about 630 millimeters and about a 2.8 meter dig depth. So if you've got rocky ground, then that's going to be an issue. But that said, you know, pecking rock is one of the things that we just do. But obviously we'd have to cost that into it to see if it falls beneath the sort of like cap that we've set on what we can spend before there's no money left in the scheme to pay for everybody else's work.
Great, thanks, Paul. So the next question. Do you think binding successors in the title would be a detriment to any sale of a property in the future? I think that's probably a question for Laura.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think the first observation I'd make on this is that we aren't going to be able to avoid that requirement, to be totally frank about it. And the reason I say that is because the unilateral undertaking has to be entered into by way of a legal deed. So the requirement to be in this scheme is that they've been secured in that way with the local authority. So that will be a standard requirement as a matter of course. Will it be a detriment to a sale? I think not. The reason that I say that is because all 106 planning agreements are entered into in this way, so they aren't uncommon by any means. They're a standard way as a part of a development of making sure that any obligations that need to be in place are secure. So they're very common and they arise an awful lot in the conveyancing process. And as I say, the nature of the obligations here are such that they are in accordance with general regulatory requirements and reflective of this particular scheme and situation. So I think not. It may well be that they take a bit of explaining as part of the conveyancing process, and that would typically be by way of providing a copy. And the solicitors, as part of a conveyancing transaction, would be able to provide a copy and say, here it is, and it would then be very clear that actually the obligations aren't particularly onerous, and it will be very clear then what the prospective purchaser and indeed their mortgage company, if there's a mortgage company involved, would have to do on an ongoing basis.
Can I just come in there as well and say that the obligations for maintaining it are no more than the regulatory requirement, in that it should be serviced annually as per the manufacturer's guidance and emptied, in that time period or as required. The only additional thing is that you have to provide that certificate to the local authority once it's been serviced. So what we're asking, you're bound to it rather than having to not have to do it, but it's the no more onerous than you should be doing anyway to make sure your system stays functioning well.
Thanks both. So moving on to the next question. Again, I think this is one for you, Paul, about is there the option to go for a Clargester treatment plant with the mixing rather than air blowing mechanism, as I understand this to be even quieter?
You're right about the Clargester biodisc being what they call whisper quiet. It is a very, very quiet plant indeed. It really doesn't do anything in terms of reducing phosphorus output, though. It wasn't designed to do that, and it's not one of the plants that we've put forward because it really doesn't generate the phosphate savings that are needed to make the installation worthwhile. So I'm afraid no, there isn't an option to go for a Clargester treatment plant under the scheme. Of course, you're very welcome to put one in under your own steam, but it won't really do anything for phosphates.
Can I just say there's another second half of that question at the bottom. If not, are there any fitted graph 1 tanks that can be visited to hear how loud the hum is? Our neighbour has a WPL diamond tank and it's quite noisy.
Yes, WPL diamonds. They are quite noisy. The blower that comes with the graph tank is one of the 2 quietest that you can get. What comes with the WPL plant isn't quite as quiet. It's also a question of where you put the kiosk. So the WPL one is basically in what looks like a recycling bin, and there's a lot of vibration usually in those. And of course, that sort of is like a big resonator box, if you like. So one of the things is to work out where we put the kiosk. And if it is noisy, then soft planting. So, trees and bushes, shrubs around the kiosk often help to absorb the noise, to break it up. So there are ways to mitigate that.
Great, thanks, Paul. There's quite a lengthy, very technical looking question on the legal side. I don't know whether, Laura, can you read the question and then maybe you can respond on the text, or I don't know whether it's one that you want to answer live. I'm not sure.
Yeah, forgive me, I've not fully read and digested that one as yet.
Okay.
But no, I will either look away and type a response while we go through others, or if not, follow up directly with the person that raised the question.
Great, thanks, Laura. Thank you. So there's a question here about my septic tank is shared with one neighbour and on their land. Does this create a problem? This is a very common scenario that we keep coming up with, I think. I don't know, Sarah or Paul, whether you want to come in on that one.
Sarah, I'll let you do that one.
I think it's almost actually more of a Laura question. Laura, to you.
No, thank you. Yes, no, this situation has come up an awful lot, as you'd expect. It's not an uncommon situation at all. And again, as I say, something that part of the reason we look at carrying out all the title checks at such an early stage is so that if there are any circumstances like this, that we are aware of them and kind of proceeding on that basis. So I think the key here would be to ensure that if we've got a shared system, that both parties or all parties that are benefiting from that shared system are on the same page and happy in proceeding in the same way as part of the scheme. So, you know, there's that kind of in principle discussion about being happy to go ahead with the scheme in that way. And then we would look to kind of delve in a little bit more detail in terms of whether there are any consents required, obviously now hopefully not planning permission given we resolved that issue, but property rights and easements. So we would look into those as well and make sure that all the relevant rights are in place and properly secured so that the upgrade can come forward without having any inadvertent impact on any of those arrangements.
Great, thanks, Laura. Sorry, just looking back through the list. So somebody's asking a question about that their property has a detached stone barn in the grounds, which potentially looking to convert in the future. Could a larger system be installed to future-proof for this? Again, I think this is probably quite a common scenario where people are you know, preparing for the future and maybe future developments. Who's best?
I'll just chip in there. I think from the perspective, financial perspective, if it's, you know, one dwellings is possibly wouldn't make that much difference in size, and that would come in within our budget that we have. So yes, potentially. It's also a question for Paul in how does that affect it if you oversize the system and then you only have 2 people living there and it's actually designed for 7. I don't know. So that's a technical question. I don't know, but financially within reason, if it's within our budget, then possibly. So that'd be down to the individual. We'll have a conversation.
Just to answer on the capacity, yeah, it depends on the size of the house that's inhabited and how many people live there all the time, because the size of the packaged sewage treatment plant is driven by the number of bedrooms. So if it's a 3-bedroom house, it's a 5-person tank. If it's a 4-bedroom house, it's a 6-person tank. The graph 4-bedroom house tank for 6 people also does for 7 people or 5 bedrooms. So the rule is number of bedrooms plus 2 equals the size of the population equivalent of the tank. Graph guarantee the process down to 25% of the full load. So obviously if you've got a let's say an 8-person tank, you need to have at least 2 people in there all the time. If you are then adding another property that is not going to be occupied for some time, then it's likely that you'll fall below that 25%, which can't then guarantee you remember in my presentation, I showed you some figures from the test certificate from the graph plant of its removal efficiencies. The removal efficiencies for BOD, suspended solids, ammonia and phosphates would be lower in that case. So it wouldn't be hitting its target removal, certainly for phosphate, on which the free upgrade is based. So we'd have to look at that carefully. They do supply at an additional cost a sugar-based solution that makes up the organic load, but you've got to have that fitted, and then you've got to supply the solution into it as well, and that wouldn't be part of the ongoing agreement. We wouldn't cover that cost for the ongoing supply of that solution, but we'd talk it through with you, and then we'd come to some sort of solution for that.
Great, thanks, Paul. So another question about, are you subcontracting to Northwest Septic Tanks for the assessment and installation?
I'll take that one. The answer to that is no, we're not subcontracting to Northwest Septic Tanks, but we are working with Septic Tanks Northwest. They are 2 different companies and they are very, very different in terms of what they do and how they work. So we've worked with Septic Tanks Northwest for about 8 years, 9 years. We've subcontracted to them before. We are the main contractor. They use our risk assessments, method statements. The work is done under our insurance, and they are the subcontractor. If there's a problem with an installation, you come to us about it because we are guaranteeing that installation, and then we take that up with Septic Tanks Northwest. But it's basically to cover the ground there. But yeah, not Northwest Septic Tanks, but Septic Tanks Northwest. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. That's quite confusing. So another one, probably another question for you. How often does the sludge need emptying, and does it depend on use?
Yeah, it does. It does depend on use. So if you've got, like, say, you know, if it's a 3-bedroom house with just 2 people in, you've got a 5-person plant. It's not at full load, so it won't need emptying as regularly. But what we do as part of our service visit is we do a settlement test on the what's called the mixed liquor in the treatment plant. So we take a sample of that and we leave it for 30 minutes and see how long it takes for the solids to settle. If the solids are below 70% in that settlement jar, then it doesn't need emptying. But of course, if we think it's going to go above 70% in the coming year, we'll tell you that and say it'll need emptying in about 3 months or in about 6 months. But generally, we find that with the graph plants, fully loaded, they're around about 18 months there or thereabouts for being emptied. So it's not too dissimilar to what people are doing septic tanks at, to be honest with you.
Great, thanks, Paul. And I think there's probably another question here, another technical one about if it's an air-blown system, does that blow the gas back into the air?
Yeah, if you obviously it's an anaerobic process, so it's less smelly than a septic tank. But yeah, it does produce a smell. So blowing air through sewage makes smelly air. The key criteria is that you should have an open soil vent pipe on your property, so that obviously you're pressurizing the tank by blowing air into it. But what you want is the air then to be allowed to travel back up the foul drain, up the soil vent pipe, and out above the level of the eaves of the property. So if your soil vent pipe doesn't reach the eaves, or it's got an air admittance valve or a Durgo valve on it, that needs to be taken off, and it needs to go above the level of the eaves of the property so that any wind can basically just take that over the top of the roof. But again, we look at that when we're on site as well. Great,
thank you, Paul. We've only got about another 10 minutes, so just trying to think about which of the questions that are most might apply to more than one person here. What's the rough overall financial saving for people using this scheme compared with going directly to a supplier?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, go on then, Paul.
Yeah, it really depends on the let's say in 2024, our average billings for a packaged sewage treatment plant replacing a septic tank discharging to surface water varied between about £8,000 plus VAT up to about £19,000 plus VAT. It depends on the site, the access, what we're doing with the spoil, how far we've got to bring the electricity to the sewage treatment plant, what machines we can get in there, how good the ground is to dig, so on and so forth. So if you've got an open field with a gateway into it, then it's not going to cost you as much. If you've got a very ornate garden with a septic tank in it, we'd probably think twice about doing it, to be honest with you, because you just end up with so much making good. We are system designers and installers. We are not, we don't lay patios, we don't create paths, we don't replant gardens, that type of thing. So, it depends very much on the site, to be honest with you. But it's a substantial saving over what you'd be paying yourselves. And as Sarah's already said, the general binding rules, which are a quid pro quo for not having a permit from the Environment Agency, specifically say that you need to have your system maintained by a competent person in line with manufacturers' operation and maintenance manuals. So you're not being asked to do anything that you wouldn't be asked to do if you were installing it on your own behalf. So hopefully that answers the question. If people have questions about specific sewage treatment plants and so on and so forth, I'm very happy to take those as well, because yeah, I have a fairly niche knowledge of what's available.
Great, thank you, Paul. We've got two sort of similar sort of watery questions. One of them is about having a water borehole on our shared property with a shared septic tank. Is the distance from a borehole a problem? And then a second question from a different person about my house is close to the river and both my garden where the septic tank is sited and the drainage field floods during exceptional flooding. Would the new system be able to cope? So there's two kind of questions there around water and the kind of drainage field design, I guess.
I'll
So
let
Paul,
Paul have a sip of water and quickly answer the borehole one.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't have a drainage field within 50 metres of a borehole. Obviously, it assumes that the borehole is in current use. If you do, then it can be that it can be permitted depending on the relationship, i.e. slope of land and where it is located. So that would be generally no, but you know, we would have to look at that. Unless you want to add anything else, Paul.
Yeah, we've applied for I wouldn't say dozens of permits for discharges close to boreholes. It usually requires, so we apply for a permit from the Environment Agency and see if that's issued first. It usually is, because there's usually no alternative for the Environment Agency but to issue a permit, because they can't just close the drainage down of a property. But what they sometimes do, often do, is they request that the septic tank is upgraded to a packaged sewage treatment plant anyway. What it does is it just creates a delay, because the Environment Agency, like many government agencies, is understaffed and overworked. It takes about 6 months for the Environment Agency to turn a permit round from application to determination. So it'll just slow the process down. But if you have a drainage field within 50 metres of a borehole for potable water that's still used, you have a non-compliant system anyway. So you're better to get that in order if you are thinking of selling your house at any time in the future, because that will come up in conveyancing. And then that'll cause you a 6-month delay as you try to sell your house. Ask me how I know. We've come across that situation quite frequently, where we have to just put a permit in and people just have to wait. Sales fall through. So it's best to just get it organised now.
Great, thank you, Paul. And then another
Sorry, Paul, did you want to briefly comment on the flooding question about
Oh yes,
what
of course,
to do
yeah,
if it's located
absolutely.
in a flood zone?
Yeah, I did a survey on one, and I've got to get back to the poor unfortunate people because they're very, very close to the River Lowther. We talked to Graf about it, and Graf said, well, we haven't done any testing of flooding our sewage treatment plant to see what happens, because it's completely unpredictable. So you can imagine that a sewage treatment plant that normally sits about 7/8 full, if it gets flooded and it has processes going on inside it, blowing air through it, settling, decanting, if that's just full of water, those processes can't carry on, and so it's just going to disturb the processes in there. So it's fairly pointless actually putting in a packaged sewage treatment plant in an area that's going to flood, because when it does flood, it's going to throw the biological processes completely out of kilter. I mean, it's possible to put the kiosk above the flood level, and you can still blow air into it. But if it's full of flood water, then it's just going to churn absolutely everything up. You're going to lose the biology that's developed in there, and it's going to take time to come back again. So it depends how often it floods, how badly it floods, so on and so forth. But I'd be tempted to say that in terms of the benefit to the environment, I would say it's not really there. from installing a packaged sewage treatment plant where it's going to flood, to be honest with you.
Great, thank you, Paul. I'm conscious of time, so we'll just quickly go through the last couple of questions. Is the electrical installation included in the upgrade?
I'll to me that comes out and does the survey, so I get all of these questions, you see. So yes, there was some lack of clarity about that at the start. What we find is, I mean, this goes back to what we were saying earlier about having a cap on costs. So if you've got a modern consumer unit that has spare ways in it, that then the electrician can take out a separate isolator and put that directly to the sewage treatment plant, then yes, that's going to be included, because it's going to be fairly low cost, 500, 600, 700 pounds there or thereabouts. If your sewage treatment plant is 200 meters away from the house, and we've got to run steel wire armored cable 200 meters and dig a trench to put that in, supply the cable, which is going to be massively thick anyway because of the amperage that it's got to take, then we talk to you about that and say, come on, it goes over our cap. We need a contribution from you. Similarly, if you've got an old electrical system, you can't wire into old electrical systems without upgrading them in some cases under the I think it's 18th edition now. So electricians are not permitted to put extensions onto systems that they feel to be, or not feel to be, know to be dangerous or old. So yeah, again, depends. We've not asked anybody for a contribution so far.
Great, thank you, Paul. I think Laura's working on some answers to these legal questions, so we can summarise those when we send out the sort of communications after this webinar to people who might be interested in that. And then last question, if your house was within 50 metres of mains drainage, would it be an alternative to join into that under this scheme?
Normally it's 30 meters. That's the current rule for development, that if you are within 30 meters of a mains drain, you are obligated to connect to it unless there's a significant reason why you can't, rather than 50. It is not actually part of this scheme, although it would be potentially a way of generating credits overall for nutrient neutrality. We've used this in other areas of the country. So interesting question. That's my answer for now, but I may go and revise that and contact the person who posed it later on. I'll raise it with the council actually, because we haven't yet. Obviously it's a septic tank upgrade scheme, but we haven't talked about going direct to mains. So I think, yeah, I'll come back to you on that one. Interesting.
Great, thank you. So that looks like that's all of the questions for now. If people have other questions that they want to come back with later on, do get in touch with any of us. And our final thing just to note is that the next steps, hopefully people who are on this have already registered and have got information already, but if not, this is the details on how to register for this scheme with Our Rivers, or you can scan this QR code. There's no commitment at this point, it's just to find out more information and to work out whether your tank is suitable and yeah, do the eligibility checks. So at that point, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for joining us on this webinar, and we hope you found it useful. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.
So